Good morning, I'm Kensei and welcome to Dragon Trek. Today we are going to talk about my out-of-control journey to the Appalachian Trail, the events that transpired and the choices I made to actually get here. I am a geek, and I have always been a geek. I enjoy things like Star Wars, the MCU, I read, I write. And when I grew up in the previous millennium, before the internet, the library was the coolest place ever. My journey in regards to the Appalachian Trail started in 2014. I was working on a location-based story and I didn't know where to place it. I did some research and I finally decided on the middle of nowhere, Maine. One of the events that was going to happen in that story was that some of the characters a couple of years down the line would leave that place for some sort of adventure. I didn't know what that adventure was going to be, so I did some additional research. I discovered the Appalachian Trail and I decided that that was the adventure they were going to have. So I decided that they were going to spend one summer hiking the Appalachian Trail. And I know that 10 weeks is less than most people need to hike 2,200 miles from Georgia to Maine, but that just made the story fit even better. After the summer of 2016, which was the summer I wanted them to have this adventure, I did additional research about the Appalachian Trail. Trail maintenance, fire hazards, water hazards, and exactly what the trail looked like that summer, so I had the specific details for my story. And after that, Appalachian Trail videos started showing up in my YouTube feed, and I started watching them. And I watched more of them. And with time, the question of me hiking the Appalachian Trail popped into my head. But I didn't answer that question. In 2018, another story took me to Germany, or it would have, but renewing my passport took longer than I had expected. So I had to cancel the trip. In 2019, Disney opened Star Wars Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland and Disney World. And I'm a huge Star Wars geek. I just had to go and build my own lightsaber. The day before I was leaving, I called my mother to say hi and remind her that I would be out of touch for the next 2 weeks. She told me that she didn't want me to go to Florida because there was a tropical storm coming, as if I listened to her opinion about such things. But unbeknownst to her, I'd already changed my itinerary and I was traveling to California instead, because there were no open slots to build lightsabers in Florida. And yes, I do listen to my mother's opinion, unless they're about non-negotiable things. But don't tell her that. I love my time in California, and I've been there before. And I traveled for over 24 hours by taxi, bus, plane, taxi, bus, taxi, to get to my motel room in the panhandle of Florida. There was another story I wanted to do some research on that was located there. Before I left on my trip, I had done my research. I had selected a motel close to a place where I could rent a bicycle. But when I got there, they didn't have any bicycles for rent. But they knew a place 5 miles down the road that did. So I started walking. It was only 5 miles. But there were a couple of things that I did not take into account. My internet on the phone didn't work all the time because I was in a different country. And I had forgotten the precise address for the place that had bicycles for rent. But it was on the same street and I knew a number that was higher than its address, and if I got to that number I had passed it. I had this camera with me and recorded my walk and the things I saw, and I didn't consider that I was walking slower because of it. I usually walk at about the same pace as Google, but I'd only walked 3 miles when I was supposed to have walked 5 miles with the camera. The third thing I had not taken into account was the Florida weather. When I got to the number that told me that I had walked too far, my clothes were drenched, my legs felt like boiled spaghettis, and I was dehydrated. And by this time the sun had set. But the Florida weather, for a guy like me coming from the northern hemisphere, far north, it was still pleasant. And one of the decisions I had made before making this trip was that I was not going to travel by taxi. And the only time I had broken that decision was when I traveled from California to Florida. And even though my legs felt like they did, I was still going to walk back to my motel. But I needed something to drink, I needed something to eat, and I needed to use the bathroom. Fortunately, I found a store that allowed me to do all three. In the section where they had the orange juice, the temperature was much lower, and because all my clothes were wet, I was freezing, and I left as soon as I possibly could. When I returned to my motel room, I checked the map, because with Wi-Fi I had no problems with the internet. I had walked 14-15 miles, and with the time that I had taken to do that, I started thinking about the Appalachian Trail. I started making some simple calculations. And yes, I know that walking on a road in the Florida heat is not the same thing as hiking the Appalachian Trail. And I took that into account when I made my calculations. And I decided that that time frame was something I could do, and I decided that I was going to hike the Appalachian Trail. As an aside, when I got back home to my apartment, I looked at the map, I looked at my recording, and I discovered that I had indeed walked past the store, and I had it on camera. However, there were no bicycles outside the store, there were no lights in the store, there wasn't even a sign in the store that told me that it was there. So there was nothing that would have allowed me to see the store or know where it was. There were no bikes for rent there either. Having decided that I was going to hike the Appalachian Trail, I set a goal of saving the money in the year 2020 and then hiking 2021. Mid-February 2020, it became clear that I would not be able to save enough money in 1 year. I wouldn't need 2 years, but I would need sufficiently more than 1 year that 2021, wouldn't be a financially viable year to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail. But I didn't want to postpone my hike. And the first time I allowed myself to think about postponing the hike, the first thing I thought of was a start date, 22nd February of 2022. The way we write dates, that's a palindrome date, and as a geek, I loved that. And I figured geeks don't hike the Appalachian Trail, so there wouldn't be that many people starting that date. As an aside, that date written the US way can be written as a sequence of 5 2s. And as it was on a Tuesday, it became known as Tuesday. And one of the most popular starting days of the entire hiking season. So I guess there are more geeks on the Appalachian Trail than I thought. But going back to February of 2020, a short time later, a pandemic hit the world, and it felt great to have chosen to postpone my hike because I wanted to, rather than because I had to. 2020 passed, most of 2021 passed, and it became possible again to register for an interview at the embassy. From what I read on the website, I could get a date fairly quickly, but the first available date was the summer of 2022, which meant I would have to postpone my hike until 2023. I wasn't happy with that. But I didn't have a choice, so I decided to do that, and I thought about it, and I realized that I had two significant dates coming up in 2023. A 30-year anniversary and a 35-year anniversary. And I'm actually recording this video on the day of my 30th anniversary. So yay! And having realized that the starting date of 2022 was magical, and I was thinking that today would have been my starting day for 2023, would have been much more personally significant. The first thing I did after setting that start date, I was wondering, how would I beat that when I would be forced to postpone my thru-hike again until 2024? But I didn't have an answer to that. In the spring of 2022, I happened to look at my passport, and I realized that it would expire in 2023, which meant I had to renew my passport before going to the embassy, or otherwise I would not get the visa. There wasn't much time, so I checked if there was a slot open in the city where I lived, but there was nothing available in the time frame that I needed it to be. So I checked my hometown, but there was nothing there either. Then I checked the other cities in my county, but nothing was available there. And then I checked the other cities in the county where I was born, and there was nothing there either. Then I checked the surrounding counties for both of those counties and found nothing. And then I went through every county in alphabetical order just to see if there was a place, a time slot that I could use to renew my passport. But there wasn't, with one exception. In the far northern reaches of my country, about as far north as where I had served in the army, but on the eastern border, where there was a time slot for me to renew my passport. From where I live, it takes 2 hours by train to get to the capital. From there to this town, it's about 800 miles. About the same distance as traveling from Atlanta, Georgia, to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I had to take the overnight train. When I got on the train and the train conductor had checked that I had a ticket and knew who I was, he told me I had 15 minutes to change trains in the town where I served in the military, which was awesome to me because I didn't have to wait for the train for very long. However, he added, at that time the overnight train is usually at least 30 minutes late because it is waiting for other trains to get to it so their passengers can transfer over to the overnight train. The next morning, when I talked to the morning conductor, he told me that we were already over an hour late. So I had to continue to the terminus and take a bus from there. Fortunately, the train company texted me tickets that I needed for the trip. When I finally got to my destination, I was 2 hours late. Fortunately, my appointment was in the afternoon. This was still before lunch. And because I arrived at the bus station, I was virtually next door to the police station where I was to renew my passport, while the train station was on the other side of town. And having nothing else to do, I headed over to the police station. There was only one person working to renew passports there, and there was one person getting his passport renewed. There were 2 women and a child waiting for their turn, and then there was me. When he was done, the woman working there said that she had time for one more party before her lunch. And as they were there first, it is only courteous and proper they do this first, and that I would have to wait until after lunch. And I was expecting to do that. However, one of the women lived out of the country and had to fill out additional paperwork. She hadn't done that, so I got to skip ahead in the line. The renewal went well. I would be able to pick up my passport in my town when it was done, so I headed across town to the train station to wait for my train. It was spring in my hometown, but it was winter up here, and there was snow everywhere. I had realized this before I left, but too late to do something about it, so I was still wearing shorts and a spring jacket. And when I got there, the train station was locked. Wearing shorts in wintertime, usually not such a big deal when you're moving, but when you're standing still, it quickly becomes an issue. This train station had been vandalized, so they locked it. And it was now only open when there was a train there, and there weren't that many of those. However, that day and the next day, they were having an art exhibit in the train station, so it would be open in the afternoons anyway. Only had to wait outside for I don't know, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes. It got a little bit cold, so I had to deal with that. But I got inside. I looked at the art exhibit so that I truthfully could say that I was there for a legitimate reason. I had looked at the art exhibit, and then I sat down. I ate a sandwich that I brought with me, and I read the book that I brought with me because I knew I had time to spend. The trip home was uneventful, and when the time came, I got my passport. And knowing that I would not be hiking the Appalachian Trail in 2022, I lost interest in watching Appalachian Trail videos on YouTube. I lost interest in keeping in touch with the community. So I didn't, despite those videos being a huge part of why I made the decision to hike the Appalachian Trail. About a month before my interview, I got a text message from the embassy, and they had cancelled my interview because they didn't have time. Apparently COVID-related delays were still a thing. And the next available time slot for an interview was the summer of 2023, which meant I would have to postpone my hike until 2024, as I had predicted. But the repeated delays did not change my mind in regards to hiking the Appalachian Trail. It was not so much that I wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail as I needed to hike the Appalachian Trail. In the same way that I needed to walk back to my motel room with spaghetti legs rather than taking a taxi. Towards the end of 2022 I got another text message from the embassy with an accompanying email that told me they have moved my interview and that it would take place in the beginning of February instead. And because of that, at least in theory, it would now be possible for me to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail in 2023. And having found this out, I made sure I could take a year off from work. They approved that. I am slower and I wanted the extra time to make sure that I didn't have to rush to finish. Unfortunately, I'm not the kind of guy that likes exercise. And yes, I know the irony of wanting to hike the Appalachian Trail 2,200 miles and not enjoying exercise, but here we are. So I had not taken the opportunity to become as fit as I otherwise could have been. So I'm still the overweight couch potato, but I'm spending my time in front of the computer, not the TV. I got documents from my place of employment showing that I had the time off and I still had a job when I would return after the hike. I got documents showing how much money I'd saved. I had my DS-160, and since I had renewed my passport I had to fill that out once again. I had my new passport, and I took all those documents with me to the embassy. And 20 minutes before the bus would leave from my hotel to go to the embassy, I realized that in my effort and focus to make sure that I got all the needed documents with me, I had forgotten to bring a mask. And without a mask, I wouldn't be let into the embassy area. So I talked to the people at the hotel and they gave me a nice looking black mask for free. And I left on the bus. We were about 20 people who got off the bus and were on our way to the embassy. And there was already a queue, maybe 20 yards, waiting to get inside. And this is not a social distanced queue, it's a normal queue with people standing next to each other. I got there 7:45, my appointment was at 8:15, and it took me 45 minutes to get to the door. I showed my passport and my DS-160, and they let me inside. And they only let one person inside at a time. You go through an airport-like security check, and then you follow the signs to the waiting room area. And about this time, it's a little after 8:30. A security person told me who the first person I needed to talk to was, and I talked to him. He wanted my passport, he wanted my DS-160, he wanted to know why I needed a visa, and he wanted a photograph. And since I took the photo in a photo booth, I handed him all the 4 photos I'd gotten in case one of them was more appropriate than the other. He said that he hated all of them equally, and I told him that was fine because so did I, and he got a laugh out of that. He then told me to wait, and so I sat down and waited. I got my book out to read and wait. This is maybe 8:35, and somewhere around 8:55 they called my name. And I had the feeling that some of the people who were there before me were still waiting. I don't know if that is true or if that's just what it felt like because I was waiting a lot less than I thought I would. Went to my booth, they took my fingerprints, she asked why I needed a visa. I told them I was hiking the Appalachian Trail and that would take a long time. She asked me what my job was, and I told her what my job was and that I had been with the company for over 15 years, and then she approved my visa. The interview was so fast that it was over before it really had begun. They hadn't asked me anything about any of the documentation they asked me to bring, and I had overheard while reading my book that others had had longer interviews. And I asked them about extending my visa, as I'm expecting to take approximately 10 months to hike the Appalachian Trail. But they told me that they didn't do that. I would have to do that with immigration when I arrived in the US. Then it was time to leave. The entire experience up to the point of the interview went pretty much exactly as I had expected. The interview went nothing like I had expected. Well, of course, other than the result that I got my visa, but how the interview was conducted and how quick it was completely different than my expectation. I went back out again and I got on the bus maybe a couple of minutes after 9 o'clock. So it took a little more than an hour. And about the mask, no one was wearing a mask. No one that worked there, no one that visited there. Because that was instructions for the 2022 interview, not the 2023 interview. But at least I got a nice looking mask out of it. And that's my experience. That's how I got to the Appalachian Trail. All the strange roller coaster-like experiences. Keep on trekking.